Hi there, 2254, and this is Dr. Ang coming to bring to you a legal presentation. So if you pull up your PowerPoint, you can follow along with me, or you can just listen and take notes, whichever works best for you. The format that we'll be using is similar to 6-4 with regards to ethics. We're going to have 1 hour that you'll view the PowerPoint, and you can make notes, you can jot down questions, and then I can clarify that during the second hour of class when we'll join together via Collaborate. You can pop on if you would like further clarification. I'll also, during that time, I'm going to offer some different questions, so I'll be posing that to you as well. The legal definitions and knowledge base information that you'll receive in the PowerPoint, I want to see if you can identify that if it's in a patient case study, if you can identify that more in an NCLEX style question. So bringing that knowledge level more towards an application and an analysis standpoint. So regarding student learning outcomes, what are we exploring and diving into legal aspects of nursing care? What are we bringing that content to the forefront for you at this stage in the program? The outcomes for the class are our goals, and the intentions of this class is to define and discuss basic legal terminology and types or sources of law. We want to know where the laws derive from. We want to identify and differentiate concepts related to negligence and malpractice. What do those concepts mean? We hear them a lot, that legal aspects will hear the terms used kind of loosely, but when we dive in and peel that back, what actually is nursing negligence or medical malpractice? We want to identify legal defenses applied in professional negligence cases, and then compare and contrast sources for standards of care. When we are going to function as now throughout history, we started as just bedside, just caring for someone, to now we are in a professional role. And with that professional role, there is a standard of care. Where do we find that standard of care, and how do we ensure that we are practicing within that standard of care? And then we're going to review the nurse's responsibility in confidentiality. This is more so on the forefront, the whole aspect of confidentiality. It has been with HIPAA, that's been in the works for a while, but now, that extends to so many areas that oftentimes you can step out of the normal standard of care and fall into nursing negligence without even realizing it. So we're going to try to bring some of those concepts and those issues and concerns to the forefront as we work through the legal aspects of nursing care. Typically when we are in class, and I love, again, I mentioned this in my ethics video as well, I love when we're all together in the class. It's such a rich environment. Each student brings such a unique perspective. Their expertise and their experiences all come together, and it makes for some beautiful conversations, some really rich conversations where we're respectful of everyone's thoughts and opinions, and where we're all at in our specific unique journey. But since we cannot all be, and we're just half and half, I've tried to break the course up in watching the lecture so that we're all on an even playing field. You'll watch the lecture, then we're going to join together and kind of tap into some of those conversations that I can kind of bring up and get your feedback, hopefully. So we'll do kind of doing a mixture of, we have some that will be my PowerPoint, so everyone's watching that in the same format. There are, throughout the PowerPoints, there are some video links that I would encourage you to go back and watch, but I'm not going to take our class time together to stop and view that for you. That will just be extra supplemental information, and I will allude to that if it's something that you need to for sake of the exam, or that I feel it's important for prepping for the NCLEX, then I will make mention of that. Otherwise, you can just go through, and there's a lot of nice to know information in those videos that can help solidify concepts as we go. So then we will come back together on that second hour, and then I'll be there for questions and concerns, and then I can tap in to present some of those NCLEX style questions or patient case scenarios, and see if you can pull out those legal concerns from those. So we will get started. The first slide that you're going to see, typically we would break up into small groups, but we're not going to do that for case of this. I'm just going to pose these questions and let you think about them as we work through them. So imagine a society without government or laws, what that would look like. We've seen in recent months, just with society in general, we have seen what it seems when there's riots and things can get out of control, and that is with a government and laws. So just imagine if there were no law enforcement in place, what that would look like. And then in turn, after you take a minute to think about that and reflect on what society would look like, would you want to live in a society where there were no laws? Oftentimes we don't like laws to be applied and enforced for us, but when you think about if everyone went about with whatever they thought would be appropriate or right in their mind, it could be a very chaotic society. So not only laws, but law enforcement is critical. In government, no matter where you fall on the spectrum with government, we also see how important it is just that the protection for each citizen is so critical. So imagine, in the same vein, imagine a healthcare system without regulation. When you go to emergency departments with an acute illness or an injury, you want to know without a shadow of doubt when you enter in that there's a certain standard of care that the healthcare workers will be held to. Similarly, when you are a healthcare employee, you also want to know that you're following a standard of care, and if you're in that standard of care and there is an injury or there's something, a tort that is formed or a lawsuit is named, you're named in a lawsuit, you want to know that there's a little bit of a protective barrier. And if you are within that standard of care, that you would be protected regardless of the outcome in that situation. So it works both ways. As a patient and as well as a healthcare worker, we want to know that there are appropriate healthcare system regulations in place. And then discuss the ramifications, or brainstorm in your mind the ramifications of such a system. So who wins and who loses? Oftentimes in a society, we see tendencies for sometimes money is power. Sometimes certain situations can tilt more towards someone that financially there may be benefit for others. And oftentimes even with healthcare, we see if someone gives a report and it says so-and-so's child is in that room, or this is this particular doctor's wife is in that room, in some sense it's almost referring to or insinuating that you should give better care to that individual, as opposed to maybe someone in the next room that is a child that's in custody, DHS custody, or is being an individual that's been accused of a crime and there's an alleged case there, an accusation. Is there any sense of, in the standard of care for nursing, the same care should be justice for all, the same care should be given to each individual. So who wins and who loses, it should be fair, inequality. If there's absence of regulation, and then you think of when there is regulation in the standard of care, then we know that it's a level playing field for all. And there should be comfort in that, knowing that. And what are the benefits or rules of regulations in a society and in healthcare? We've kind of touched on that. Can there be too much regulation? This is where we get into some really rich conversations, and I want you to bring some of this when we come into Collaborate in the next hour. Can there be too much regulation? In society in general, can there be too much regulation? And then in healthcare, I would venture to say, just from my own perspective, that there can be a little too much regulation sometimes, maybe from a government standpoint, political standpoint, depending on where you stand in that spectrum. But then when it comes to healthcare, I don't know that there can be too much regulation, because if I'm a patient or my child is seeking healthcare, I want to know that every T is crossed, every I is dotted. I want to make sure that everything is under strict regulation. So you can just think about that, brainstorm that, and kind of see, because this just sets the premise for why we have legal ramifications in nursing and in healthcare, and why it is so important that you're aware of the standard of care for nursing, and that you know how important it is to abide by that standard of care, and the protection that that will give you as a nurse, knowing if you practice within that, then you will be protected. Otherwise, we could get in more of a state of I feel paralyzed. I don't want to do anything for fear that there may be a consequence that is perceived as negative, and I may be named in a lawsuit. So that's also the comfort that a standard of care gives, because if you're functioning in that, and if you were named, if you're doing what another reasonable or prudent nurse would have done in a similar situation, then you will be covered because you're following in that your scope of practice and in that standard of care. Why are there laws regulating nursing? The practice of nursing requires specialized knowledge, skills, and independent decision making. There are some aspects that are very cut and dry, and it's very obvious, very objective. Then there are a lot of things, some that are subjective, and assessment skills, or if it may be basic time management. What I felt was important, I was helping this patient because I felt like at that time this was the most critical. Whereas maybe another nurse would have thought, yeah, that was critical, but I would have probably done this first and then went to room 307 for that. Or I didn't get on their pain medicine, or I didn't turn them right on that hour because I was over here dealing with a patient that we were doing paperwork because now they're a DNR, and I was trying to explain all that to the family members. But then I'm all of a sudden named in a lawsuit because of another patient that now has a level 3 pressure ulcer, or bed sore, if you will. Decubitus ulcer now is a 3, and now I'm named because of basic time management, and that was somewhat of an independent decision-making skill. So just knowing that you document well is a good way to cover yourself with this, that you are aware of what the roles and responsibilities are, and then you are managing that to the best of your ability with the resources that you have. And oftentimes we also are going to couple that with the fact that many times we're short-staffed, and that just can compound that issue, because nursing care poses a risk of harm to the public if practiced by professionals who are unprepared or incompetent. That's why at the School of Nursing here at TU, we find it so important that you're going to be prepared and you are going to be competent. We can't help as much with your confidence. That comes with practice. But we are going to make sure that if you go through this program and you do the time and you put in the effort, that you're going to come out and you're going to be prepared and competent. And then with skill and with practice. And as you transition from that stage of being a novice nurse, you're going to get to the point where then that confidence will also come. So through its police powers, it's required to protect the citizens from harm. That protection is in the form of reasonable laws regulating nursing. And that's what we have said. If you go on the Oklahoma Board of Nursing website, you can go on to the far left-hand side. You'll see where it says the scope of practice and the standards of care. And you can pull those up and read through those. We'll touch on those, though, as we go through here as well. So what are the specific laws related to nursing? You can take a look at this slide. We're not going to dive too deep into that. This is more of a slide that I want you to be aware of this information, and what can the Nurse Practice Acts do. So that is something that we need to be aware of, be able to answer a question if it was posed on this. Nurse Practice Acts, each state will have one. They will vary slightly from state to state. But what is critical with the Nurse Practice Act that you realize, they all have the authority and power and composition of a Board of Nursing. So there's a Board of Nursing, education program standards. So we don't, as schools of nursing, when we're during the pandemic, different things, we had to get clinical hours. We have to get those clinical hours in order to, at the end, award you a degree, and then where you can then move into sitting for the NCLEX and then practice as a registered nurse. There is a standard of care set by the Oklahoma Board of Nursing that says how many clinical hours have to be set, how many classroom hours, and all the boxes that we need to check in order for us to award you the nursing degree that you have earned. Standards of scope of nursing practice. So this is something that's revisited, addendums are made, and there is a scope of nursing practice for the state of Oklahoma that you will find also with the Nurse Practice Act. Types of titles and licenses that we are going to award, and that's ever expanding. We started with practical nurse. We started with a registered nurse. It's gone from associates to bachelor's to master's to we have terminal degrees, we have DMPs, we have PhDs, all of these that can come. Nurse anesthetist, we have all the spectrums of nurse practitioners. It continues to grow. And with that, we also have not just the titles, but the expectations and the standards that are set for each of those degrees also fall underneath and are managed and monitored by the state. All states, all laws are subject to change with regards to certain states' constitution. May be amended, statutes may be amended, repealed, or expanded. Administrative bodies may be dissolved, expanded, or redefined. All of this is ever changing, so it's important to even go to some of the nursing conferences. You're going to find out what's changing. I encourage you not to get stagnant. It's easy to get into a role, learn a little role, just keep your head down and just do your job and go home. But I encourage you to embrace the profession of nursing and go to some of these conferences, at least at the state level, go to some at the national level, and be on the forefront and be a frontier and an advocate for our profession. And then judicial laws affect new court decisions. So it's a judicial laws that affect new decisions that surround our profession. So what does a nurse need to know about Nurse Practice Acts? The practice of nursing is a right granted by the state. You do not decide when and if you choose to be a nurse and take that on as yourself. This is a right that's granted by the state. And I think when we look at that, it sounds a little bit trite, but this is a privilege. It's a professional privilege to be able to serve the citizens of your state and to be in a professional role, especially when we say this is the most trusted profession. And we, as nurses, when you have that degree, this is a privilege and it's granted by the state. So they also can grant it. They can also take it away if you're not functioning within the standards of care. And we're here to protect those who need nursing care. We're here to protect. We're here to, as we said, beneficence. We're going to do good. Non-beneficence, we're not going to harm. That is the premise. We are here to provide competent and be prepared as nurses to provide competent care to those in our state or those that are in our care to which a duty is owed. The Guidelines of Nurse Practice Act and its rules provide safe parameters in which for us to work, as well as protect patients from unprofessional and unsafe nursing practice. Let's give an example of when I was asking, can you ever have too much oversight? And in the sake of nursing care, I may think that, well, all they're doing is finding things wrong and they're trying to write me up. And I don't like to feel like that they're always on us as nurses. We should be able to function individually and provide our professional care. However, one bad apple can ruin the whole bunch, and I think this stands true. If there is a nurse that is supposed to be administering a certain medication to a patient, but he or she intercepts that and is taking those medications, confiscating them out of the hospital for outside on the black market sale or whatever the case may be, if they take that out and that patient is not receiving a medication that nurse, he or she, is documenting that they took, the optimal outcomes are not being met for that patient. So therefore, we have many medications that have to be co-signed, or we have to count the medications at certain times, is how we used to do it. I know with the Pyxis and stuff, but there's different things. We have to have 2 sets of eyes with things, and we have just a level of oversight to protect from the small percentage of nurses that don't practice professionally as they should. And because of that small percentage, we are all held to a little tighter, more stringent expectation, and which from my perspective is a good thing. When you flip the switch and think, if I'm laying in that bed or one of my loved ones is laying there for that care, we want to know that that oversight is there. Who was the first registered nurse? And the key here is registered, because I think we all have an idea, or maybe not all of us, but most of us probably realize when we say who's the first nurse, typically Flo comes to mind. Florence Nightingale was the first nurse. The key here is who was the first registered nurse. And I want you to look that up. And then when we come together, I want you to tell me who the first registered nurse is. Because the key here, when we're talking about registered, is, as I mentioned earlier, we used to just be caring and by the bedside. And then now we have fast forwarded it to where we are now. Registered means there is a set of guidelines and a professional oversight for how we function as a nurse. We don't just do what we think might be best, or what we've heard is best, or in our current times what we've Googled and we now think is best. We are not just caregivers. We are based on research, scientific evidence-based research. So we are brought to a completely different standard. We set for the NCLEX to make sure that we're competent in what we do. We get checked off on skills. We have a certain amount of hours, clinical hours, that we are expected to maintain. Continuing education, all of these things to bring us to the point where we have earned that word registered nurse. And when we come back together, I want you to tell me who is the first registered nurse. And I've already mentioned this, so it's not Flo on here, so you have 3 more options. So look that up, and then when we meet together, I want you to, I'm going to ask you that information, okay? Nursing as a profession has characteristics where it requires an extended education, as I mentioned, a theoretical body of knowledge, safe and specific services that we offer, and we offer within our scope of practice. So if someone comes to me and, okay, I'm a nurse, but can you, whatever the case may be, can you rewire my orthodontics? Can you remove this? Whatever. No, that's not in my scope of practice. Know your scope of practice of what you've been checked off on, what area you're working on, and what is the standard of care and the scope of practice for you as a nurse in that role. We have autonomy. We as nurses are not just lumped in with physical therapists and pharmacists and physician assistants, whatever. We are autonomous of our profession and incorporate a code of ethics. We also have our own code of ethics by which we have standards of care. We have nurse practice acts, licensures, and certifications that we have to maintain. This is not a one-time. Some professions, you get a certification at one point, and that kind of carries you, or a licensure. We have very rigid standards, and you will lose your license if you do not maintain that. Science and art of nursing practice is the beauty, and I absolutely love this because I am all about the art and the caring science that's found in nursing practice. So we have the science, we have the skills, we have the pathophys that all blends in, and then the research-based, evidence-based practice of how we do and conduct ourselves in a professional role with the scientific aspect. But then as nurses, what makes this profession incredibly special is we also bring in the art and the caring side. So with that, so as nurses, when we're at the bedside, we are on the front lines. So we're also on the front lines because we can be at the bedside. we are right with our patients. So the importance with that is you're not just caring for a disease or an illness or an injury, you're caring for a person. So I encourage you, and the more you have me and the more I have you in clinical and in classroom, you're gonna find out that I'm very passionate about this. Find out who that patient is. Find out if it's an adult, do they have children? What do they do for work? What are their hobbies? Find out about that patient. The more you find out about them, then the more compassion and caring aspect that you can bring in when you look. This is someone's dad, mom. This is someone's child. If it's a child, what sports do they like to play? This is going to aid in your care. If they like music, then help them to get that aspect in the room and get that there. Do they like to watch a certain thing? Don't assume that a teenage boy wants to watch sports and just naturally put that on. Get to know them. Also, when you're getting to know them, get to know everyone else in the room. Who's that primary caregiver that you see, and how are they doing? Do they need things? Ask them about, even if there's a critically ill child, there can be a child on hospice with a terminal diagnosis, but ask them about their child. That child is significant to them, and if you're caring for that patient in that family, then they should feel that child is significant to you. Again, I'm going to repeat, don't just care as a nurse, don't just care for the diagnosis or the illness, but care for that human that's in front of you. And how do you get to know them is you need to fully engage with that caring and compassion side. That's when the science and the caring aspect come together. That's when the beautiful profession of nursing can fully unfold. Benner's stages of nursing proficiency. So as a new grad, you're going to come out and you're going to be a novice. Just own that. If there are things that you don't know, the worst case from legal aspect, when new nurses will be named in a lawsuit, if there's a tort, will be from new nurses trying to be an expert. If you don't understand a certain concept, you don't understand a certain skill, you need to ask. And again, you're competent and you're prepared, but on certain cases, you may say, I'm not confident in that. Could I practice? I'm not fully confident in that. Could I watch you do this, one time, and then could I go in and practice? Or can I do it in this case and you be there to help guide me to build up that confidence? But as a novice, just own it. I am a novice. I don't know everything. You do not know everything. I don't know everything. We don't know everything. So just be upfront with that and honest and transparent with your other staff, with your manager. Like, I want to get better, but I'm just, this is an area I feel like I need some more experience. Advanced beginner, competent, proficient, and then expert. It's hard to be an expert. You're not going to be an expert in very many things. There may be, after years and years of practice in a certain area, you may be, okay, I'm pretty proficient. I'm pretty comfortable in this. You may get then to the point where I can teach it to you now. I'm an expert in this specific area, but don't expect to come in and be an expert in every area of nursing, because that's just unrealistic. So where do you find your nursing standard of practice? If you'll click right here, you can pause this if you would like. Go on to the Oklahoma Board of Nursing website. And again, over on the left-hand side, you'll see where it says Standard of Practice. Go ahead and click on that. Last I checked on there, it was not letting you print them, but you can pull them up, similar to the Code of Ethics. I don't know, you can pull them up and it's a read only. It may be back to where you can print that off if you want them. You may not even want to, but the key is here that you know where to find them. And as we mentioned in a previous slide, they're ever changing. So you need to be aware. Ignorance is never an excuse. So if you're named in a lawsuit, one that you actually get called for a deposition, you have to go and they're going to ask you questions. You can never say, or you can say, but it's not acceptable to, I didn't know. Well, this was the standard of care. Why did you fail? And these legal teams are savvy. Okay, I work as a legal nurse consultant. They have members of the medical profession that know what is the standard of care. So you can look at that both ways. I go on both spectrums. Sometimes I'm on the team with the healthcare worker. Sometimes I'm on the team that's representing the patient, depending on what the case is. But you cannot say I did not know, because if the outside public knows know where to find the standard of care, and they can find out whether or not you're functioning within that role. So we as nurses need to be very in tune with the standards of care. And where you work, when they ask you in your interview and there's questions and they say, do you have any questions for us? That's something that I like to ask. I like to say, what if there's a change in the standard of care in the Nurse Practice Act? How do you let us know? Is there a way that you communicate that? And even though we know that it's ultimately it's our responsibility as a nurse, but also there's another layer there. Now that I work for this professional institution, would you let us know? Can you let us know what that would look like? So anyway, let's go to the next. Scope and standards of practice. Nursing scope. And just a second.